Welcome to the deep dive. Ever been put on the spot, maybe in a meeting or just chatting, and wished you had a clearer, sort of more supported answer right then? Well, this deep dive is definitely for you. We're basically aiming to give you a shortcut to sounding, well informed and articulate when it counts. Today, we're unpacking some really effective strategies for discussion. We're pulling insights from a source called IELTS Speaking, discussion strategies for part three. Think of it as a kind of playbook for sounding thoughtful, confident, even when you're under pressure.
Yeah, and that source really hits on a common challenge, doesn't it? It's all
Right.
about how you communicate effectively in those moments. What's really interesting, I think, is how it breaks down a strong answer into like
Yeah.
three core parts. It's not just what you think,
Right.
but why you think it, and crucially, how you can back it up. So that structure, state your opinion first, then give a clear reason, and finally support it. With facts, maybe expert quotes, or just good examples. That's the key.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that foundational bit. The source suggests structuring answers almost like you're building a mini argument, right? It mentions splitting the response, maybe tackling it like an essay prompt almost, aiming for a couple of sentences on each side for balance.
Exactly. That balanced approach is really smart.
But how do you stop it sounding, too stiff or rehearsed in a normal conversation?
That's a really good question. The idea isn't to sound like a robot, definitely not. It's about clarity. Your
Right.
opinion is key, sure, but the real weight, the persuasiveness, comes from the support, aiming for maybe 3, 4 sentences per question. That usually hits the sweet spot, gives you space to state your point, explain why, and add that evidence, but without rambling. The trick is to internalize it, make it feel natural.
Okay, got it. So we've got that basic structure down. How do you elevate it, make it really stand out? The guide has this interesting trick about using time. They call it chronological order. How does that work?
Right. Yeah, that's a great way. It basically lets you show you understand the bigger picture, not just the now. You compare and contrast things over time. It just adds depth, shows more nuanced perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Take global warming as an example. If someone asks, will people keep ignoring global warming?
Mm-hmm.
You could talk about past attitudes, like maybe that initial denial where people kind of hoped it might just go away.
Wishful thinking? Yeah.
Exactly. And contrast that with now, where, well, you can't ignore the worsening weather patterns. We see more floods, really hot weather, places like England, Spain. People
Yeah.
are connecting the dots now. It adds richness, showing you see the history and maybe even where things are headed.
That's a powerful way to frame things, giving that historical context. But sometimes it's less about when and more about why. Which brings us to the next technique, right? Give reasons. How does focusing on the why make your point stick?
Precisely. Reasons are the engine of persuasion, especially when you back them up properly. They explain why your opinion makes sense. Think about what governments could do about global warming, a strong reason for action, develop awareness campaigns, really spell out the dangers now and for the future.
Okay, that makes sense.
Another clear reason with a concrete step could be something like a carbon tax, taxing the polluters. Our source actually points to Canada doing this. They brought in a carbon tax on gasoline purchases back on January 1st, 2020. So it shows how a clear why can link directly to real action.
Okay, so we've covered looking back through time and digging into the why, but what about issues that aren't black and white? Shades of gray. How do you show you've considered all sides? That's where the benefits and detriments approach comes in, yeah. Pros and cons.
Yes, exactly. And that one's fantastic for showing critical thinking. That ability to see both sides is so valuable, whether you're talking policy or just, I don't know, picking a new phone.
Huh.
So, with climate change getting worse, you could discuss the potential positive side. Maybe it forces a quicker global response to cut pollution. But then you balance that with the obvious negative. Climate's just getting progressively worse.
Fruit frames the complexity.
Right. It raises that question, what actually drives action? You see some places like the Scandinavian countries already pushing hard on cutting emissions. That gives a glimpse of the potential positive effect of collective action. It allows for a much more nuanced conversation.
Okay, these are great strategies when you have something to say. But let's be real, what happens when your mind just goes blank? That awful silence. The guide mentions ways to handle being stumped. What are some of those lifelines?
Ah, yes, the dreaded blank. Well, first off, just thinking out loud can be surprisingly effective. It
Mhm.
fills the silence, buys you processing time. So you get a weird question like, are animals smarter than humans?
Okay, yeah, tricky one.
Instead of freezing, you could start with, well, if I had to answer that, I'd probably lean towards thinking they are. in some ways because humans can be so.
Mm. Ooh.
See, you're talking, you're thinking, the conversation keeps moving. And then there's specific phrases, things that are totally okay to use to buy time.
Like what?
Simple things. Excuse me, could you repeat the question, please? Or, excuse me, could you explain what pick a word means? That works too. And,
Yep.
just simple fillers like, let me see. Or admitting, I haven't really thought about that before.
Right.
The source lists others too. I'm not really sure what you mean. On the one hand, you mean, or, sorry, I just need a moment to think. Even things like, as I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
or one thing I forgot to mention, can help you circle back or transition smoothly. They're like conversational tools.
And that's the key takeaway, isn't it? These aren't just like exam tricks. They're genuinely useful in everyday life. Anytime you need a second to gather your thoughts, whether it's a big presentation or just a coffee chat, these give you that breathing room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Makes the whole process less intimidating.
So just to quickly recap, we've looked at structuring answers clearly, almost like mini arguments, using chronological order for depth, giving solid reasons with evidence, weighing up the pros and cons. And finally, there's really useful ways to handle hesitation, to buy yourself a moment. These can seriously change how you approach any discussion.
Absolutely. It's not fundamentally about passing a test, though it helps there too, obviously. It's really about becoming a clearer, more confident communicator overall, someone who can offer responses that are, well supported, nuanced, and actually understood.
Makes sense. Okay, so here's a final thought for you listening. Think about how deliberately structuring your opinions, even just a little, and backing them up with why you think that might change things. Even in casual chats, what if every discussion, big or small, became a chance for a little deep dive into your own thinking? Something to chew on.